The topic of today's lecture will serve as the background for our study of the history of English. We will discuss the language family English belongs to, the Indo-European language family. This lecture will consist of 3 parts. Our goals today are to explain what it means for languages to belong to a particular family, to trace the development of scientific thought on how modern languages came to be, to discuss key scholars in historical linguistics and their contributions to our understanding of the subject. We will also provide a brief outline of where Indo-European languages originated and how they spread over time, and briefly address language families other than Indo-European. Let's start with the scientific thought on historical linguistics. To begin with, even naive observers notice that many languages have a large number of similarities among them. For example, we have similar words for family members, numbers, celestial bodies, and even foods and body parts in multiple languages. And these similarities are not limited to words. Languages in particular groups share a large number of core sounds. They encode similar grammatical concepts and morphology, like verb conjugation for person, number, and tense, marking nouns for grammatical gender, and even having words or morphemes to signal whether the concept being referred to is definite or indefinite. One could assume that these similarities come about merely due to the fact that speakers of different languages live side by side, so to say. But we observe similarities between languages that are not geographically close. For example, it might not be surprising that German and English words may be similar. But what about the similarities between German and Greek, or Bulgarian and Danish? Yet such similarities do exist. At the same time, languages that are spoken right next to each other, such as Finnish and Swedish, or Lithuanian and Estonian, for example, share no such similarities, so geography cannot be the deciding factor. One can also assume that such similarities are merely a matter of chance. Yet their sheer number defies the probability of coincidence. Therefore, there must be a reason for such resemblances of features. Since the 1600s, some scholars have postulated that such similarities can be explained by the fact that languages are related. It is important to understand that when we say that languages are genetically related, we mean it metaphorically. There is nothing about the DNA of their speakers that makes them similar. Rather, the relatedness is historical and developmental. A parent language, the term for it is Ursprache, is spoken in a particular area. Over time, long time, it changes and evolves in ways we discussed in our previous lecture. Its speakers also migrate, or wage war on the neighboring groups, or intermarry. They absorb other groups into their own culture and language, or they assimilate to other groups. And over the centuries, branches spring out from the common root, travel and grow, and even though they may develop in different ways, they retain the core features of the parent language. That is what we mean by languages being genetically related, with the word genetically in quotation marks. Although people learning languages other than their native ones have probably often noticed that some words and grammatical structures in their L1s, that is their first languages, were similar to the words in languages they were studying, the first person to formally postulate that languages are related to each other was Marcus van Boxhorn. Van Boxhorn lived in the Netherlands in the first half of the 17th century. He was a professor at the University of Leiden and wrote on many subjects from the history of the Netherlands to archaeology to the origins of language. He noted that many European languages, including German, Russian, Welsh, Lithuanian, and so on, were similar to each other, and proposed that they all originated from a parent language, which he called Scythian. William Wotton, who was born in the second half of the 17th century, was a noted theologian, classical scholar, and a polyglot. In the early 18th century, he built upon the work of Van Boxhorn, introducing the concept of proto-language and showing relatedness among languages as different as Icelandic and Greek. But we attribute the critical work to Sir William Jones. William Jones was a son of what could be termed a middle-class family. His father was a noted mathematician, and Jones himself was a very talented individual, even as a child. The family was well enough to send him to Oxford, where he received his bachelor's and master's degrees in the late 18th century. But they weren't really rich, and Jones had to take the position of a minor judge in India, where he arrived in the early 1780s. In India, Jones studied the Vedas, Sanskrit, and other aspects of the Indian culture and science. It is Jones who suggested that not only were the modern European languages related to each other, but that ancient Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit had a common root. He delivered his lecture on the subject to the Asiatic Society in 1786. A great deal of progress in historical linguistics was made in the 19th century. Franz Bopp, a German scholar, conducted an in-depth analysis of verb inflections in multiple languages. Through this analysis, he confirmed the relationship among Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit, and added Persian and Germanic languages to the family. Rasmus Rask, a Danish linguist, conducted the first formal phonological analysis of as diverse languages as Russian, Greek, and Danish, and so on. His analysis served as a foundation for Grimm's Law. And speaking of Grimm, Jacob, of the Grimm brothers fame, relying on Rask's phonological description, formulated a principle that explained the sound change that separated the Proto-Germanic branch from the Indo-European trunk of the tree, so to say. This principle, which we will be discussing in future lectures, is called Grimm's Law. Grimm's Law had certain exceptions that Jacob Grimm could not account for. It took more than 50 years for another Danish linguist, Carl Werner, to discover the underlying pattern in these exceptions and incorporate them into the law, now the Grimm-Werner Law. Let's recap. We have discussed the similarities in the structure of many languages that provide an explanation for the genetic relatedness among these languages. We have also traced the development of scholarly thought in historical linguistics, referencing the work of key figures in the field. Let us now turn to our two remaining objectives for the lecture in the next section, the origins and spread of the Indo-European languages.